You're listening to Who Were the Comedian Harmonists, the true story behind Broadway's harmony. I'm your host, Ruthie Fierberg. I had never heard of the Comedian Harmonists. That is until I saw the Bruce Sussman, Barry Manilow penned Harmony. I first saw the musical off-Broadway when it played the Museum of Jewish Heritage in downtown New York City. And I just couldn't believe I hadn't known about a group so famous. As in the musical, they toured Europe, they sang on the radio in the US, they were big time. But our lack of knowledge about the Comedian Harmonists is by design. You see, the Nazis didn't want us to know. They wanted to wipe out all traces of this group. But harmony flies in the face of that. When Sussman first started writing in the 1990s, his only historical reference was the 1976 Eberhard Fechner documentary, The Comedian Harmonists. Most of the members were gone when Bruce started. The biography of the Comedian Harmonists would not come out until 2013. Sussman did speak with Joseph Roman Sikowski, one of the members of the group, but we'll get into that in a later episode. Even so, harmony gets a lot of the history right. Yes, the Comedian Harmonists were world famous. Yes, they performed with Marlene Dietrich. Yes, Hitler and his leadership strolled by the group on a moving train. But the Comedian Harmonists did not begin from day one with the 6 men it ended with. And there is more to the story than where the musical stops. In this first episode, we give you a full overview of the group, its beginnings, its ascent, and its eventual split into 2 groups, the Jewish Comedy Harmonists and the non-Jewish Meister Sextet. But we start with the music. After all, it was the unique sound of the Comedian Harmonists that captured Germany's attention and mesmerized the world. It's a sound you can only begin to describe once you've heard it.
The first 2 words that come to mind are complexity and playfulness.
It's this kind of ethereal, almost like alien, strange music box, funhouse kind of sound is how I would describe it. They had these such like floaty and really peculiar voices. And of course we have everything from a bass to a baritone to a tenor to a countertenor. But the combination of it was something like I truly had never heard of before out of a human's mouth.
They were so known for their instrumental sounds, their unusual sounds, their funny sounds. And it's surprising because they have this beautiful, trained, not quite classical, but like classical pop sound. But then they surprise you. They're a surprising singing group.
There's something so special about singing in dense 6-part harmony with 5 other great singers.
You listen to their music and you feel like you can't help but not hop to it.
They sang 1 take, 5-part harmony with an accompanist in perfect tune, mind-bendingly difficult arrangements. That virtuosity is what I took away from it. I am deeply moved whenever I hear them sing.
And the group as a whole were trying to do something that wasn't being done at that time. Any vocal group.
It was accidentally that I came in contact with the Comedian Harmonists in the early 1990s.
This is Jan Grübler. Born in a small town 75 kilometers north of Berlin, Jan now resides in Oranienburg, Germany. He's in his 50s, a former homicide detective who has been a professor of criminalistics at the Brandenburg State Police Academy for over 2 decades. On the side, he's turned his detective work to the lost history of the Comedian Harmonists. He wrote the book on the group's founder, Harry Fromerman, and contributed to the Douglas Friedman biography of the group. He's been a comedian harmonist enthusiast for more than 20 years.
I saw the TV documentary made by the German documentarist Eberhard Fechner, and he made a documentary of 3 hours on TV about the history of the group and the fate of their members. And it was so exciting for me that I started to search myself for the music, for the persons. The music of the Comedian Harmonists was well known, and everybody in Germany knows some of the numbers, like The Little Green Cactus and Wochenend und Sonnenschein. They're well-known songs, but nobody knows about the group and the history and the fates of their members.
So starting from the beginning with them, where did the idea for a vocal group in the style that became the Comedian Harmonists, where did the idea for that first come from?
The idea came to Harry Fromerman, the founder of the group, in the late 1920s, because he was influenced by shellac records from the American group The Revelers. And he came from a very musical family, and he had music in his veins, you can say. And he was able to play piano and to compose music and to arrange music. And so he got the idea, why shouldn't we do something similar in Germany with German lyrics in that very modern and until then unknown style? That was the starting point, you can say. And he wrote some lyrics. No, he wrote some scores. And there's a group that still wasn't existing, and he had no members, no companions. And after he was prepared to found that group, he started to search for singers.
What was the style of the Revelers, and how are the Comedian Harmonists even different from that, would you say?
Well, I think for that time, the style of the Revelers was new because they were not only singing like a chorus, they sang it in a jazzy style, in a barbershop style with syncopes. And Fromerman was excited from that kind of singing and from this precision the singers had in singing together. And so he thought, why we shouldn't do that in German? And of course, the style of the Comedian Harmonists later was a little bit different. They created, you can say, a little bit of an old style, and they sang in German. That was, of course, important to be successful in Germany that time.
So like you said, Harry was writing this music and had no one else to sing it with him. So how did he find the other people to sing with him?
Well, Harry had a companion that was a colleague of him from stage. He was an actor that time. And his friend, Theodor Steiner, had together with Harry that idea. And they founded a group without members and called them the Melody Makers. And then he put an advertisement in the newspaper searching for singers.
Audition ad. Attention. Rare opportunity. Tenor, bass, professional singer not over 25. Musically talented, nice-sounding voices for unique ensemble. Kindly give days and times when available for rehearsals, etc.
And the special problem was they had to be able to come to the rehearsals without any payment. And he knew that it would take months of rehearsals until they will be ready to appear on stage.
So you start with Harry Fromerman and Theodor Steiner placing this ad. Who responds to the ad and who comes to the auditions?
Well, it's said that there was a huge number of applicants who appeared in the small flat of Harry Fromerman there in Berlin. But there was no one among them who seems to be okay. Robert Biberti, the basso, didn't appear in Fromerman's home, but he wrote a letter on that advertisement. And so Steiner and Fromerman answered him and invited him to appear there for a certain time.
After Biberti's private audition in January of 1928, he was invited into the group. In addition to Fromerman, Steiner, and Biberti, singers Victor Kolani and Louis Callagher rehearsed with the group. But just a few weeks later, Kolani and Callagher were out, replaced by Walter Nussbaum and Asper David Leshnikov, better known as Ari.
Yeah, Bibetti was a singer in a big vaudeville theater in Berlin, the große Schauspielhaus. And there he knew other singers, for instance, Ari Leshnikov, and he brought them to the group.
Steiner, Fromerman, Biberti, Leshnikov, and Nussbaum. But for a little bit of time, the group, the Melody Makers, as they were first known, were 5 people, right?
Yeah. And the piano player, in the first time, the piano player was Theodor Steiner.
From January 1928 until May 1928, this group of 5 rehearsed. On May 10th, 1928, they stepped into the studio for the first time to record as a test of their own abilities. Shortly after, Steiner left the Melody Makers for unknown reasons. He was replaced vocally by Joseph Roman Sikowski, who had been sharing a dressing room at the Schauspielhaus with Biberti and Leshnikov. Roman, as he was called, had a beautiful baritone voice to add to the mix. But Steiner had also been their piano player. So Leshnikov recruited a new pianist named Erwin Boats. Leshnikov worked as a waiter at a Bulgarian restaurant where Boats had played. So now the group included Boats, Fromerman, Biberti, Leshnikov, and Sikowski. The latter 3 from the Schauspielhaus. How big was the chorus over at that theater? Was it small or was it large and they were just the best of the best?
No, there was a big chorus or chor. It was the most famous and biggest vaudeville theater in Berlin that time. But they were unknown as persons. They only were chorus singers and not soloists. And the responsibles of the theater, they didn't knew anything about that new group, and they did it in their spare time. After they had to appear on concerts or plays, they rehearsed at night. And finally, they decided to leave the Schauspielhaus and to stay only with the new group when they started to earn money, of course. And they only appeared in Berlin, and only as a small number with 2 or 3 songs in revues, not with own concerts. First, there were only small numbers in cabarets and in nightclubs and in bars. That was for the first 1.5 years.
After singing around like this, the group landed an audition with the prestigious Scala Club and bombed. Soon, they got another important audition, this time with Kurt Robacek, a Viennese Jew who ran the famous Cabaret de Komiker, also called the Kadiko. The Kadiko was Berlin's largest cabaret. This time, they succeeded and booked the job. But for unknown reasons, the scheduled engagement never took place. So in August of 1928, Harry Fromerman put in a call to his distant relative, Bruno Levy. Levy was an agent, and after hearing the Melody Makers, called up Erich Scharell, the head of the Schauspielhaus. Scharell offered them a contract on the spot. At the time, 3 of the Melody Makers were still singing in Scharell's chorus, but now they'd moved up in the world.
Erich Scharell was the biggest and most well-known showmaster of the 1920s in Berlin, and he had a very successful plays in his Schauspielhaus. And there was a revue where the Comedian Harmonists were set in after the revue was ready. But Scharell has heard of them, and he heard how they sang, and then he put them in the interruptions, in the breaks of the revue, when they redesigned the stage. In that time, the Comedian Harmonists...
Right, when they need to put the set together for the next act.
Yes, and in that time, the Comedian Harmonists had 3 songs in that revue, but it was so successful that there was a prolongation of that contract and of that play for some more months.
Wow. And so was Erich Scharell, I don't know if this comparison makes sense to you, but would you say he was like the Florence Ziegfeld of Germany?
Yes, I think you can say so.
Scharell was also responsible for changing the name of the group from the Melody Makers to the Comedian Harmonists. According to Harry, Scharell thought Melody Makers was too matter-of-fact. He wanted something that emphasized their humor and musical prowess in one name, And so, Comedian Harmonists. It's also interesting that this German group always had an English name.
I know that is not the correct English, comedian harmonist, but in that time, everything had to be in English because they thought it's modern and it sounds like the big world if we call ourselves in English. They made mistakes. The first time they called themselves melody makers with the German word melody and the English word makers, a wrong mixture, and comedian harmonists, as to say, is also a wrong mixture. But finally they became successful, and then it was impossible to change the name.
The newly rebranded Comedian Harmonists stepped into the recording studio on August 28, 1928, and made their first recordings for publication. Recorded on the Odeon label, these recordings featured Fromerman, Boats, Baberti, Leshnikov, Sikowski, and Nussbaum. On September 1st, 1928, the group held their first rehearsal for the Chorale Revue and made their debut with Chorale's Casanova 2 days later on September 3rd. In October, they officially signed a recording contract with Odeon. A few months later, in February 1929, the Comedian Harmonists left the Chorale Revue. And there was another big change. Walter Nussbaum left because of conflict within the group. For a brief moment, a singer named Willi Steiner took Nussbaum's place, but it still wasn't right. So Boats recalled a classmate of his from the School of Music, a man named Erich Collin. And so it wasn't until May 1929 that we have the Comedian Harmonists as we know them, with Harry Fromerman, Robert Baberti, Ari Leshnikov, Joseph Roman Sikowski, Erwin Boots, and Erich Collin as the 6 members.
That was the final stuff until 1935, until the disbanding of the group.
These 6 men ascended quickly. They performed in Cologne, Germany. They played the Scala. In fact, one night at the Scala, the Comedian Harmonists were seated near none other than the Revelers, the American group that had inspired Harry in the first place. The 2 ensembles faced off in an improvised singing duel right then and there. There's no record of who won. Later on, the Comedian Harmonists sang with Marlene Dietrich at the Berliner Theater. In October, Odeon canceled their contract, but another label, Electrola, promptly picked them up. Their pay per record was the same, but this new deal included royalties, which would change the game. They made their first appearance on the radio in October of 1929 and released their first album with Electrola in November. In total, the Comedian Harmonists released 23 records in 1929. On January 20th, 1930, the Comedian Harmonists debuted their first solo concert. In April, their first film appearance. 2 years from the time Harry placed that initial ad, the Comedian Harmonists were a great success. What did their lives look like? What did the lives of those 6 men look like?
Well, that is a phenomenon that they also described themselves in their interviews for that Fechner documentary, that all around of them was poorness, and the society was getting down and the economic problems were growing. But they started to earn money more and more, and they became rich in that very difficult time. I think it wasn't easy for them because most of them were no rich men before, and suddenly they had enough of money, and all around them was poorness.
This was also the time that they were known as previously the Comedian Harmonists, parentheses, the German Revelers, and then they get to drop that qualifier. They get to stand on their own as just the Comedian Harmonists.
In the first time they used that name, they also used other names, for instance, the 6 from the great Schauspielhaus, to use their reputation to become more well-known. But finally, they were well-known as Comedian Harmonists, and there was no need to use other extra names.
And then they get to do their first solo concert. Like you said, they were part of another act. How many songs would they sing? What were the kinds of music that you would hear if you went to a Comedian Harmonist concert?
we have some schedules of those concerts. There were about 20 songs they sang in an evening. And they had different kinds of music. There were actual popular songs they created with German lyrics. And they also sang well-known German folk songs and some classical pieces from operas and operettas too. And that mixture made them so interesting because they were able to do all that in the same style.
I understand that what also made them so special was the mixture of the voices. Can you break down for me who sang what voice part and why you think it sounded so unique? Okay,
we have the basso, that was Robert Biberti, and he had a very warm, like it said, he had a voice like velvet, a very deep voice. He got it from his father, who also was an opera singer, basso. And then was Ari Leshnikov, the first tenor, with a very, very high tenor, the high C, the high F he could sing, and very clear and loud. And the second tenor, Erich, that was a perfect mixture with the first tenor, so they didn't oversing themselves. Then Harry Frohman, the first time he wasn't willing to sing with the group, but finally he wrote himself the scores for the third tenor, and he was some kind of a buffo, you know that? The funny tenor he's been, and he made the...
Yes, it's a specific musical term, the buffo.
Yes, and he made the most fun on the stage. And then the very experienced baritone, Roman Sisowski, he had studied music and singing, and he was a very, very nice voice. And the mixture of the five voices, that was something special. And they had to train for months to get it in a unique sound, like one sound. I think it was very complicated to do that, but they did it.
And did Boots sing also, or he only played piano?
No, Boots was only the piano player. I can't remember that there was, maybe sometimes he wrote a line, he sung also a line of the lyrics, but mostly he was a piano player. And he was very gifted as a piano player.
Things stayed copacetic until December 1930. I understand that he left for a few months in the middle of all of this success. Is that right?
That's right. That was in 1930, and it's not absolutely known why he left the group. I think there must have been some trouble among the members. And on the other hand, there were so many opportunities in Berlin to become successful as an artist. And there was the very young medium of sound movies, as a Tonfilm. And he took part in one of those productions, and maybe he thought that he can be successful as an actor in movies. But I think his dreams didn't come through, and he wasn't successful in that area. So he returned after half a year to the group because he knew, there I am successful and there I will earn money.
What was the reputation of the Comedian Harmonists around Germany at the time?
I think it was growing. They became well known, first of all, by the records. We have to consider that at that time the radio was very young, very new, and there was no internet and no CDs or something like that. And in the bigger towns, they were well known because of their concerts.
Bruce Sussman, who wrote the book and lyrics to Harmony, offers some additional context.
The recording industry was in its infancy, and the technology was primitive, to say the least. So they dropped a needle on wax, go, and they sang. One take, 5-part harmony with an accompanist, in perfect tune, mind-bendingly difficult arrangements. That virtuosity is what I took away from it. And I knew that we had to find moments in the show where we did that. I think where we do it most clearly is in Hungarian Rhapsody in the second act.
Which is modeled after an arrangement that Harry made in real life, the Barber of Seville?
The Barber of Seville. And they had a tagline on their posters, the Comedian Harmonists from Brahms to Blues. And that's how broad the repertoire was. And so one of the things that they did, the Comedian Harmonists did, when they did an evening all by themselves, there was an intermission, and when you came back from intermission, the lights were out. and they performed in total darkness.
As instruments?
As instruments. The Barber of Seville, the overture to the Barber of Seville. And the light slowly came up and you realized the sound you were hearing are 6 guys imitating the sounds of a chamber orchestra.
Despite the group's success, and a bit contrary to the portrayal in the musical Harmony, there were tensions in the group. Boats had left in December 1930, and a man named Walter Joseph took his place. But in March of 1931, there was an attempt to oust Harry. It was unsuccessful. By July, Joseph left and Boats returned. It seems relations calmed, and the best was yet to come. Things changed when they performed with the Berlin Philharmonic in 1932, that was another boost. Can you tell me about that?
Yes, because the Philharmonic, that was a very classic house, only for classic music. And it was something special or something important if a group like the Comedian Harmonists could appear there on stage. And there's Bertie once told it that it's like, I don't know in English, they beat us to 2 nights. So it was something.
Oh, the Bertie felt it was a victory every time they performed.
That was something very, very special at that time.
And it sounds like they were not only excellent musicians, they were also entertainers in the purest sense.
Yes, that is a part of their success. They were very funny. They made a lot of fun on stage. Only with some little movings and only with the eyes, they could bring the audience to laugh. And they sang the classical songs, or especially the folk songs, in a very kind style. But the funny songs, the actual songs of that time, with the funny lyrics and mostly nonsense lyric, I have to say, they sung with a lot of joy and a lot of jokes.
Who wrote their music?
Mostly they used known songs, actual songs or classical songs or folk songs, as I said, and they only have a few songs they wrote themselves, and that was mostly written by Erwin Boats, the piano player. He was the composer, and Harry Frommermann was more the arranger of the scores. So
that also brings me to the fact that not only did they all have the voice parts that they sang and each had their role in the group vocally, they also each had their role in the group logistically in terms of the business side.
Yeah.
Tell me about what everyone's job was.
Well, it's said that Bertie was something like the boss, the organizer, who made the contracts with the concert agents. And Colleen was responsible for the foreign contacts because he was able to speak French and English. When they started to appear abroad, then they had to make contracts with foreign agents. And I remember that Arelechnikov said that he was responsible for the clothing, that they wear proper clothing, which were clean, and the hands had to be clean and so on. And he had to control it at the beginning of every concert. And so everybody had a little rule beside his singing. But there were some decisions they did together, for instance, to choose the songs, which songs they want to sing and where they want to appear. That they decided together.
I know you've listened to many records by the Comedian Harmonists. Have you also seen videos of them?
There are only very, very few video takes. I remember one of Veronika, der letzte Star, but that was made in a film studio for a cabaret film. And that time, the broadcasting of films wasn't common. I know some little pieces from movies, but they didn't appear in picture in every music they worked in. In some pictures, in some movies, you only can hear them. But I think the most well-known is in the end of the movie, Die drei von der Tankstelle, where they sing in the end of the movie on stage.
So part of the reason I ask is because we can hear what they sounded like at the time, but I'm curious what it would have been like to sit in the audience and watch a concert of the Comedian Harmonists. To your understanding, what would that experience be like?
That's hard to imagine because it's long ago and conditions have changed. For instance, at that time they had to sing without technical support, without microphones and and speakers. And so the audience had to be totally noisy. But I think it must have been exciting to see them making their jokes and some choreography and singing in that quality. And as we know from a lot of newspaper articles, the audience was totally enthusiastic, and they had to give at least 3 or 4 encores after every concert.
That's incredible, that many encores. I know that there are reviews from the time that just describe audiences going wild, stamping so loud from the balcony that the ceiling would start to chip and fall on the people in the orchestra. Do you think that the comparison that they were the Beatles of their time, do you think that sounds correct?
Well, I'm not sure if that comparing is correct. Maybe you can say so. They were well known as the Beatles, but not in such a big area. And I think the audience was a little bit other because the Beatles had mostly very young people in their audience as well. But the Comedian Harmonists, they had the elderly and the younger and a mixture of all classes in their concerts.
That's really interesting, especially because they themselves were so young. I mean, looking at their ages, they were all in their 20s.
Yeah, that's right.
Unbelievable. So really, their greatest years were from 1929 to 1933, about.
Yeah.
And of course, despite the magic it seems they created inside the concert halls, there was a lot of terror happening outside of the concert halls. And 1933, as we know, is, the year that Hitler became chancellor in Germany, and laws began to pass barring Jews from holding first university jobs and government positions. Then I know that the RKK, you can say the word in German for me.
Yeah.
Yes, Reichskulturkammer, which was the Federal Culture Chamber, was established, and the RMK was the music arm of that. And you had to be admitted in order to work in your field.
Yeah.
So if you were a musician, you had to be a member of the RMK to continue to work as a musician. How did that affect the Comedian Harmonists?
Well, mostly in their interviews, they said that they didn't take care of all that development because they thought we are successful artists and nothing will harm us. But that was a big mistake, as I can say from the today's view. Because it was known that there were 3 Jewish members, and some people called that kind of music entartete Kunst. There must be a translation, degenerate art. You know that is in all fields of art, the Nazis tried to give the direction what is culture and what is not culture and what is degenerated art. And so some concert agents started to deny contracts, and some of the concerts were forbidden. And then the rules of the RMK, of the Reichschamber for Music, said that you have to be a member if you want to do your job as an artist. And there was one paragraph who said the application for be a member can be denied if you don't, that was a very sinful phrase, if you don't fulfill the conditions.
Right. Some sort of vague, if you don't meet our standards, which was to mean if you are not of the Aryan race.
That is the hidden message of that phrase. And so they tried to become members, and they wrote applications to the responsible of that Reichskulturkammer, and even to Joseph Goebbels, who was the responsible for arts in Germany at that time.
Owning the records or playing them became illegal, but people hid their 78s under their mattresses.
Oh, wow.
And then after the war, they began to emerge. Also, in the outside of Germany, people had 78s. And those got converted to 33 1/3, and they got converted to CDs. So we do have an oral history of what they did. But in Germany, you go into, back when there were record stores, the Tower Records of Berlin had an entire wall of comedian harmonists. They are renowned there. Outside of Germany, the memory just doesn't exist.
Who were the Jewish members and who were the non-Jewish members of the comedian harmonists that we know?
Yeah, the Jewish members were first Harry Frommermann, the founder. His father was a well-known Jewish cantor in Berlin, and he also owned a cantor school. The second was Roman Cisowski. He came from Poland and had Jewish parents. And the third one was Erich, who didn't realize that in the first time because he was baptized and he took part in World War I, and he didn't feel like a Jew. But after the upcoming laws of the Germans, of the Nazis, he had to learn that they think he is a Jew too. So they were the three Jewish members.
Right. Oh, goodness. It's very difficult to think about those times, and obviously there were many tragedies of that time and so much loss of life, but it is sad that there was a loss of this beauty and this music because it caused tension in the group. They thought that they would be denied membership, and like you said, there were concert agents who wouldn't book them because of that. So they were experiencing financial losses. And when people start to experience financial losses, tensions come out. And I know that there were disagreements between the Jewish and the non-Jewish members of the Comedian Harmonists at the time about who should take the hit, essentially, for the loss of income. Can you tell us about those battles inside the group for that stability?
There was some trouble between them because the non-Jewish members made the others responsible for the loss of income, and they used lawyers of both sides to clear that trouble. They went to the US in 1934, but finally some of the German members, and especially Robert Guberti, they were not willing to leave Germany because they had their families there and they had their big flat there and they had their cars there. And
their famous performance on the USS Saratoga in New York Harbor took place on June 12th, 1934. They sailed back to Germany not long after, and by August of that year, they were back in Berlin.
At that time, in 1934, they still had the hope that they can be together or stay together in Germany and appear on stages, because most Germans thought, oh, that wouldn't be so wrong, and Hitler is going after 1 year, and that was a big mistake.
Yes, well, hindsight, as they say, is 20/20. How did they fare back in Germany when they got back in 1934?
They had mostly concerts abroad in Scandinavia and in Italy and in France and so on, and almost no concerts in Germany. There was then one last concert in March 1935, and besides they made some more records in Germany too. But they knew that it will come to an end, that they won't be members of the Reichskulturkammer, and so they couldn't stay together as a comedian harmonist. And so they had to disband, or they made the decision to disband in a very friendly way.
Where did the Jewish members go next?
They went to Vienna in Austria first, because there they had the opportunity to appear in German language. That was very important because he knew when we appear in other countries, they don't understand us. Of course, they had in their repertoire some English songs and some French songs, and wherever they came, even in Scandinavia, they sang at least one song in the language of that country. But most of the repertoire were German lyrics, and so it was the best idea to go to a German-speaking country, and that was that time, it was Austria.
Austria. Ah, that makes so much sense now. Well, what I understand is that even though they had disbanded the 6 of them, music still seemed like it was in each of their veins, that this was what they all wanted to do. And so what we get are now 2 separate groups who start to rehearse and to perform. Tell me about, first, the group outside of Germany formed by the Jewish members.
As you said, they were full-blood musicians, as I would say, Vollblutmusiker. And of course, they knew that in that way they can be successful, and in that way they can earn money. They all of them had no other professions. And so they started the so-called Vienna group, the exile group, started to find new singers. And they had some support from a Vienna opera singer, and they get flats in Vienna, and then they started to rehearse with the new singers. And after 3 months, they appeared on stage again with a new group. And very quickly, they made concerts abroad, and they made the first movie in Austria. So you can say there was no big break in their success. They were introduced under the name Comedy Harmonists by the record company. And
I understand, though, that the use of the name, even though they were not the same 6 members, caused tensions with the 3 members who were still back in Germany. Is that right?
That's right. When they disbanded in early 1935, they had guaranteed each other that both groups can use the name Comedian Harmonists without any restrictions. But then, of course, it came to some accidentally facts, like, for instance, the exile group and the German group, they appeared in the Netherlands in a time of only 1 week difference. In the Netherlands, nobody knew that time that there were 2 groups called the Comedian Harmonists. They were wondering why they appear again and didn't realize that it's a complete different group. The German group, they used an extra in their name. They used the new name, Das Meistersextett, and with the addition, former Comedian Harmonists. So everybody could know, even on their records, that are the old Comedian Harmonists, but now they are named Meistersextett.
But would people know when they would hear them sing? Did it sound the same?
I think so. The sound was very similar. The exile group developed more to lyric songs and to folk songs. And of course, the German group had to change their repertoire because they were not allowed any longer to sing songs of Jewish composers, of Jewish lyricists, of Jewish arrangers. All these very important and very, very successful songs were forbidden now, and they had to study mostly new repertoire.
Oh, wow. And so because not only did Harry do many of the arrangements, so the arrangements would have been by someone Jewish, but the original underlying songs were sometimes written by Jewish composers. It gets very, very complicated. Ultimately, do you know when each group, the Vienna group, the Comedy Harmonists, and the German group, the Meistersextett, when each of them finally disbanded?
The exile group traveled all over the world. They went to Australia 2 times, to New Zealand, to South Africa, to South America. They were in Egypt and all over the world traveling. And then in late 1940, they had a concert tour to the United States with, I think, more than 50 concerts through all North America. Nobody wanted to hear, in that time, a German singing group. And so they appeared only in nightclubs and bars for a certain number of months. And then there was some trouble inside the group, so that the basso, Rudolf Mayleder, left the group. They tried to rehearse with a new basso again for some months, but then finally in spring 1941, Roman Zisowski left the group because he has heard that his father was murdered in Poland. And he gave his father the promise to become a cantor. And now he realized that after 1941. And so the group was just breaking down, you can say. The Meistersextett had different problems because, there was war after 1939. And it became more and more complicated to appear on stage because everything became limited. And more and more of the young people, especially the young people, were drafted to the army, to the German army, even some of the members of the Meistersextett. And Biberti over the time, he wasn't able to replace them by new singers. Finally, he had some Dutch singers. 2 Dutch singers were in that Meistersextett because they don't have the duty to serve in the German army. But in the end, he couldn't keep the group together, and he himself was forced to serve in the army. And so they disbanded also in early 1941.
So when we look at this full history now of the Comedian Harmonists in all of their iterations, but particularly at that height of musicality, of fame, what do you see as their legacy?
Well, a huge number, more than 200 very, very popular or more or less popular songs in a new style for that kind. An incredible kind of precision in their singing, a certain kind of humor, of course, and even in the nonsense lyrics, there's some very special humor of that time of the 1930s or 1920s. That's what will stay. I would say forever, but it will stay for the mankind as their inheritance.
What keeps you searching for artifacts and records and documents and footage?
From time to time, when I get asked that question, I say, I don't know. It's like a virus. I have a lot of friends or persons who handle with that same item, and every one of them has another motivation. Some of them are interested in the music and the lyrics and the singing. Some of them are collectors of shellac records. And I'm mostly interested in the history and in the fates of the members, even after the breakup of the group, until their death, and until today, you can say.
Being a lover of the history specifically, if listeners take one thing, if they remember one thing about the Comedian Harmonists, what do you hope is the thing that they think of first when they think of the Comedian Harmonists?
I think that is the high quality of that kind, or that special kind of singing.
The central metaphor for them, it was something I've always wanted in the show and I've never gotten it, is a shooting star. That it was a brief but spectacular burst of glory.
Who Were the Comedian Harmonists? The True Story Behind Broadway's Harmony is produced by Harmony, a New Musical, and Broadway News, the home for digital journalism on Broadway. I'm your host, Ruthie Fierberg. Thank you so much for listening. To read more about the Comedian Harmonists, visit thecomedianharmonists.com. For more information about the musical Harmony, visit harmonyanewmusical.com. And of course, to learn more about all of the happenings on Broadway, visit broadwaynews.com. If you're fascinated by what you've heard so far on this podcast, please share the Comedian Harmonists story on social media and tag @Harmony, a New Musical and @Broadway News.